Oh hey, I'm back, and it hasn't been 100 years. That's a sign of improvement, I think. Getting right to it, Base Scarlet and Violet released November 18th, 2022, and seeing that Sword and Shield ended up with a 2-part DLC, no one was surprised to learn that Scarlet and Violet would be getting the same treatment. September 13th, 2023 saw the release of Part 1 titled Teal Mask, and December 14th, the release of Part 2, Indigo Disk, together called The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero. Though unlike Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet also got a short epilogue that came out about a month after Indigo Disk called Mochi Mayhem. The epilogue didn't cost extra per se, but Hidden Treasure did cost about $5 more than what Sword and Shield had, so maybe it did after all. Either that or, the never-ending inflation that plagues our lives. And just like before, I still haven't played Sword and Shield, so I really can't comment on who had the better DLC, though I suspect it's safe to say that this is going to be the formula for the post-game main series titles for the next while. Or, I'm wrong. It's either one or the other. For now, let's dive into The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero. I'm requested to stop by Yuba to discuss an exclusive field trip opportunity available to me, some random nameless classmates, and some students from another school called Blueberry Academy, located in Unova, the region from the Black and White games, to visit a place called Kitakami. I was unable to figure out whether Kitakami is the name of a whole new region, or if it's an area within a region, but regardless, it's somewhere new and hopefully exciting. Miss Breyer, a Blueberry instructor, was to be the chaperone. Her current passion is researching the terrestrial phenomenon in Paldea, but so far has been denied permission to go into Area Zero despite jumping through all the hoops and paperwork required. Her interest in Kitakami stems from finding out that the same energy present in said Paldean terrestrial phenomenon has been detected there. She also had a copy of the Violet book to which she tells us the author, Heath, is an ancestor of hers, and flips to a page discussing a mysterious disc-like Pokémon. But since this is Teal Mask, not Indigo Disk, we can dismiss this bit of history for the time being. My Pokedex gets updated for the wonders that await, and off I go. However, upon arriving, one of the nameless students seems to have fallen ill, so it's up to me to run ahead to Misui Town to find help. Except, I don't do that. Just like in Paldea, the amount of Pokemon wandering around is staggering, and I spend a bunch of time catching as many different ones as I can find. Eventually I remember that a classmate's life could be in my hands, so I saunter into town, but get stopped outside the community center by a shy boy named Kieran and his annoying sister Carmine. I get called an outsider, which is very xenophobic of them, and Carmine challenges me to a battle which I win easily. I mean, as the single best trainer in Paldea, I like to think that this would have been a no-brainer. The caretaker of the community center comes out to see what the hell is going on and shoos Carmine and Kieran away. He explains that I and the other students will be staying at the community center during our time in Kitakami and that he'll look after us. But considering adults in Pokemon don't know the meaning of such a thing, I put no trust in this. Turns out Carmine and Kieran are some visiting Blueberry students, so they were intended to stay here as well, but due to this being their hometown, they're allowed to stay at home. Despite many in-game hours passing by this point, I do finally pass along the message that one of the students back at the bus stop could potentially be in mortal peril, and the caretaker goes to help out how he can. Side note, Misui Nurse Joy might just be my favorite character in Pokemon Violet, and Misui also has Swinub everywhere, so this just might be my favorite town in Pokemon Violet. The next morning, after getting some sleep, we're told that we're to pair up and give ourselves a self-guided tour of the area. This tour includes 3 places we are required to go to that each have a sign depicting local lore. After reading each sign, we need to take a selfie in front of it using our newly acquired Rotom sticks. I talk to the Blueberry kids and Carmine decides to be a bitch and outs him for how much he was talking about me at home after our encounter yesterday and asks us to battle him on his behalf. Pleased that I seem like a kind person. At this point, you can kind of see that maybe Carmine is not just a bitch, but she does need to work on her people skills. I battle Kieran, who is very excited to be doing this, but he also has an even weaker team than his sister, so it wasn't much of a contest. Carmine once again butts in to put out the idea of Kieran and I being a pair for the tour. Like the battle, it's something he wanted but could never have brought himself to ask. But perhaps due to see the gap in our strengths, he says that he'd only be in the way if he hangs around me, so he's just going to follow me to these places from a safe distance. Okay. Loyalty Plaza stopped number 1, and on its sign I read about how a long time ago an ogre used to live in the mountains behind the village and would terrorize anyone who came near. One day the ogre came down from the mountain on a rampage where it ran into 3 Pokemon, Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fanzandipity. They sacrificed their very lives to keep the village safe and sent the ogre back up the mountain from whence it came. The villagers deemed these heroes as the Loyal 3, gave their remains a proper burial, and erected statues in their honor. These days, the story is used to scare small children into not going outside at night alone, but Kieran has become very taken by the ogre, To him, a 3-on-1 fight is the definition of cool, and he sees no reason to be afraid of it. In fact, he used to intentionally go out at night trying to find it, but he never did. I take the required selfie. Afterwards, Kieran asks if I'd like to have a picnic with some sandwiches, and right on cue, Miraidon comes out to investigate. While initially startled, Kieran quickly becomes in awe of Miraidon and reflects more on his thoughts on me and my strength. Kitakami Hall is the location of the next sign, and on it, it describes how the ogre had 4 masks and its power would depend on which one it wore, either grass, fire, water, or rock. The Loyal 3 were able to lay claim to 3 of these masks before they were defeated, and they now reside within the hall. Kieran talks some more about how cool he thinks the ogre is, but also that he wants to become someone people can rely on instead of his sister having to do everything for him. He believes that this could lead to him being the ogre's friend. Rather than going for that last sign, Kieran suggests instead that we go to the ogre's lair at the dreaded den up in Oni Mountain. Definitely a safe and reasonable idea. It's around this time that I start getting catching fatigue. With all of the new Pokemon in Kitakami, I'm having to stop constantly to catch something, which for me was starting to affect the pace of the game. After a whole base game of moseying around with no sense of urgency, I was just wanting to kind of experience the story in an efficient way. Initially, I hadn't liked the idea of ignoring one of the key aspects of the Pokemon franchise, but in the end, boredom won out, and I ended up drastically increasing the times I'd ride on past something I knew I didn't have so I could finally get to where I needed to go. At Dreaded Den, Kieran suggests we battle in hopes of luring out the ogre. His team has gotten a little bit stronger since literally this morning, but it's still not even close. Kieran suspects that if the ogre saw that, it would be drawn to the stronger trainer hands down, so how then could he become as strong as me? But for now, we wander into the cave, and as we do, we the players see that something is watching them from around the corner outside. The cave is bare and far from homey. Kieran gets the idea of inviting it to stay at his house if he ever finds it, though worries how the town would react to that. Once outside, he remembers that tonight is the first night of the Festival of Masks at Kitakami Hall, and awkwardly asks us if we'd like to go with him. Is this a date? But before we can head over, we first need to go back to his house to get ready. Not sure about their parents, but Kieran and Carmine seem to live with their grandparents when not at school. They're very nice and very excited to see that Kieran has made a friend. For the festival, they lent me a traditional jinbei to wear, put up my hair into a unique style, and give me a teal style card, which gives me access to additional selections at salons and shops back in Paldea. They also offer whatever masks they have stored in the shed, but by this point Carmine has shown up and now rushes off to the shed because, wouldn't you know it, there are only 2 masks there. And if that wasn't bad enough, Carmine challenges me to battle again to, rub it in more that I don't get a mask? Even upon defeat, she doesn't concede hers, but says that you can simply buy one at the festival, so really there were no stakes to this at all. Most masks are of the Loyal 3, but Kieran's is, of course, of the Ogre. The point of the festival is to honor the Loyal 3, and it has most of your typical festival fare: food, vendors, and games. The food is basically festival food with sandwich buffs, so I don't bother wasting my money on those, though Kieran does buy me a candy apple. The vendors were also disappointing because you know what they don't have? Masks. Well, they do. There is a mask stand that has masks, but no one is there attending, and the game won't let me leave some money on the counter, so I guess it sucks to be me. As for the games, well, they have this one called Ogre Oustin. I got to play for free since I'm one of those there Paldean folk, and once again Kieran decides to watch from a safe distance. The idea is to ride around busting balloons to get colored berries, and you need to bring back a certain number of each color to its respective table. It's about speed and making sure wild, greedy Pokemon don't eat your berries. You get berries and items for completing it, though I did not beat Carmine's score this time, and that's okay. Kieran tells us to go off on our own for a bit, and I catch a glimpse of the same figure that was watching us at the dreaded den, so I follow it. I catch up to it, and the game initially claims that it's a child, which it most definitely is not. It seems interested in me, but Carmine arriving scares it. We both follow it some more until it ends up dropping the mask it's wearing. We try to give it back, but it runs away, revealing itself to be the Ogre of Lore. Kieran then arrives on the scene, but Carmine stops us from telling him about it under the impression that if he found out we saw and he didn't, he'd get upset. But he gets upset anyway because she's being shady, and he now assumes that we were just making fun of him. This definitely won't be an inciting incident that comes back to haunt us later. Nope, definitely not. The next day, Carmine meets us outside and insists that we show Grandpa the mask we found. Kieran appears as we're about to do just that, so Carmine basically tells him to fuck off and find something else to do, pushing the wedge between us all even further. Upon seeing the mask, Grandpa reveals the legend that the village has such a hard-on for is actually the opposite of what really happened. A long time ago, a man and an ogre came to Kitakami from a foreign land. Their different appearances scared the, apparently even then, xenophobic villagers, and they refused to let them in. Saddened, the two settled into a mountain cave. The village mask maker was the only one who felt bad for them, and so he made them several masks. With these they could disguise their faces and mingle in the village, including joining in their festival, which I'm not sure what it would have been about since the conflict between the ogre and the Loyal Three hadn't happened yet. Their masks were so grand that word of them spread far and wide, eventually attracting 3 greedy Pokemon to the mountain cave where they attempted to steal the masks. The man happened to be there, but was only able to save 1 mask. The 3 Pokemon made off with the rest. When the ogre returned, it saw only a struggle and a mask, i.e. the man was Dunzo. The ogre donned the remaining mask and then went to the village. It found and defeated the 3 greedy Pokemon, but it came across to those nearby as though the 3 were defending the village and the ogre was attacking it. Ogerpon, the ogre, retreated back to its home, and the newly christened Loyal Three got their statues. Carmine is pretty pissed about such an egregious misunderstanding and wants to tell the villagers the truth, but Grandpa forbids it. Their ancestor, the Great Mask Maker, had tried to do just that, but he ended up being persecuted as a heretic, so he decided to become silent about it publicly to protect his family, and instead the tale was passed down from generation to generation to keep the truth alive. Despite the fact that Kieran already assumes Ogerpon isn't evil, Grandpa insists we don't tell him and that he'll tell him himself when the time is right. For some asinine reason. Surely this won't come back to haunt us later. Nope. Definitely not. In the meantime, Grandpa notices that the jewel on the mask is chipped and promises to fix it. As the camera zooms out, you can see that Kieran has been listening the entire time. But everything will be fine. No worries here. Absolutely none. While the mask is being fixed, I head into town to find Kieran so that we can go to the last location of the tour. When I find him, he asks what Carmine and I were talking about. Now would be the perfect time and last chance to come clean with Kieran before falling into any dire consequences. He'd probably still be understanding by this point. It's either that or lying straight to his face, which would be very uncool of us. But of course, the game doesn't let me tell Kieran what happened, so we're forced to give this vague, bullshit answer. He tells me Paradise Barrens is the last location of the tour, but as I walk away, you can tell that he also felt that this was the last decent chance to come clean and that I squandered it. I understand the game has a specific story it needs to tell, but then why even bother giving me dialogue options? Could have had it where I start to tell him, but Carmine interrupts and changes the conversation. It's the same result, but it would have felt better as the player to have at least gotten the chance to try to do the right thing. When we arrive at the last location, Kieran wants to battle again. When previously he's taken his losses like, "Oh man, how are you so strong, darn." His loss this time is angry because he now perceives himself to be weak. Definitely a bit of a turn and definitely not caused by all the lies happening around him. Yep, nope, not that. Begrudgingly, Kieran helps us investigate this final sign. This one is a warning about Ogerpon and how you should not go out at night, but if you do, you should wear a mask. It will protect you from any other mask wearers, man or monster. But if you don't and run into Ogerpon, then you will be killed. You'll have your soul stolen. Yes. Kieran confirms what we learned earlier, that the ancestor from long ago was who made the original masks people would wear, and was also the one who came up with the festival. So I guess it was originally just a mask festival, but the Loyal Three kind of got tacked on there after the whole incident. But Kieran is also distraught that the ogre has been made into such an outcast just because people didn't understand it, and that it must be very lonely. At this point, I'm given a choice either to apologize or say that he's right, and when you tell him you're sorry, he gives a knowing, for what? And for once, I felt like a response to a dialogue option wasn't interchangeable with either answer. I guess you could say, about what, if I had said he was right, but whatever, I'm not going to find out, so we'll just say the game finally gave me the illusion of a feeling of influencing the story. We take our last selfie where you can definitely see that Kieran is not well. Even my vacant player character seems to be catching on. Done with his obligations towards the school project, he heads home to train. The next morning, Carmine asks for me to come by. Kieran is there too, but he's still very upset and leaves to train some more instead. Grandpa tells us that if we get a crystal cluster from the crystal pond on Oni Mountain, he could fix Ogerpon's mask for us. Despite coming up here a few times now, I've yet to find the actual path that leads up here. I just climbed the vertical cliff walls instead. But before we can get to the cluster, we're attacked by a Milotic. We double battle it into submission, and then pick up the crystal cluster that was conveniently stuck to it. Miss Briar suddenly appears. Actually, before I go on, it's becoming increasingly noticeable to me as I write this how many times I have to comment that someone just shows up in the story. Characters coming onto the scene seems to be this game's preferred storytelling method, but there are only so many times that I can say someone arrived in only so many different ways. I might have to get creative with how I go about this going forward. Anyway, Miss Breyer ascended to our location for the purpose of research. She explains that the crystal pool's water emits the kind of energy she's been looking for. She's not sure why it does, but if she can figure it out, she believes she could achieve terrestrialization anywhere, even far from Paldea. But Carmine is not of the scientific mind and could not care less, so we take the crystal cluster back to Grandpa. However, Grandpa is in distress because while we were gone, Kieran took the mask and went off to Loyalty Plaza, and from here you can see what's coming. We confront him, to which he, correctly, accuses us of withholding information from him, despite how much we know he loves Ogerpon. Of course, this results in a battle, and you can see that his dedication to training recently is paying off for him. As an example, his Yanma is now a Yanmega. His defeat seems to only serve in increasing his envy towards me, and he takes off for home, unwilling to hear out Carmine's apology. We done goofed. Well, I mean, I didn't. I had wanted to tell him the entire time, but sure, game, make me into the bad guy here. If that wasn't bad enough, the monument to the Loyal Three suddenly collapses, revealing the three themselves to be alive and well. Not sure what triggered this. Maybe having the mask nearby, or maybe Kieran's baby punch woke them up. Who's to say? Also, only Arceus knows how these three brought themselves back to life from only remains that have been rotting away for the past several hundred years or whatever. And let's not forget their dumb-sounding names, second only to how dumb they look. But I think they all took that personally, because they immediately book it to Kitakami Hall. They're gone by the time we get there, but the caretaker and all else who were there were overjoyed to see their Loyal Three and saw no problem in giving them the masks that have been housed there, as well as boosting their strength with their herb-filled Kitakami Mochi. After being told they're headed for Ori Mountain, Carmine and I split up. She goes back to Grandpa so he can fix the mask, and I head to Dreaded Den to protect Ogerpon. Sure enough, when I get up there, they're all getting up on it. I defeat Monkey Dory before Carmine and Kieran arrive, which scares all three of them off. Realizing taking the mask was a dumb thing to do, Kieran apologizes and it looks like he might be over his angst, until Ogerpon refuses to take the mask from him, being nervous around new people. Now, rather than help Ogerpon learn to trust Kieran, I simply hand over the mask to it instead. But the other three masks are still out there, so together we form the Mask Retrieval Squad and head for the village to gather info. Ogerpon follows us but hesitates at the entrance to the village, understandably so. Carmine tries to communicate to it that it should stay here and wait, but even though Pokemon understand humans for the most part, Ogerpon doesn't seem to get it until I'm the one who explains it to them. In the village, I keep talking to folks until I learn the whereabouts of all the members of the Loyal Three, but once we reconvene, Kieran decides to dip again. He's not as angry as before, but he's pretty put out about how Ogerpon didn't imprint on him instantly. I find Monkey Dory first, and just like when the Titans were hopped up on herbs, it seems the Loyal Three have also gained a new size to match their new strength. Carmine teams up with us, and once victorious, we're able to retrieve the mask it has stolen and take a picture with Ogerpon. This applies to the other two members as well. Like the Titans, I can't catch them upon defeat, but unlike the Titans, they're clearly just defeated, not, potentially deceased. Again. The fight with Fence and Dipty goes in my favor without a hitch, but at what cost? On the way there, I had to watch a swine-up fall down from a high ledge. It was a national tragedy, I tell you. Okidogi is last, the toughest one of all. I say that like it was a great struggle, but it was more tedious than anything. Remember, I can use Parasol whenever I want, but I'm trying not to cheese these, especially when it's not really necessary. Once the battle is won and we have the final mask, Kieran graces us with his presence to ask us to come back to the village and to bring Ogerpon. Carmine is apprehensive about this, but decides to trust her brother. When we arrive, Ogerpon is immediately greeted with open arms. Turns out, despite hating to talk to people, and the people hating Ogerpon, Kieran was able to reach out and convince them that their understanding of Ogerpon and the Loyal Three was misinformed. In real life, I feel like this result would have been unlikely, but hey, Teal Mask is almost over, so we've got to wrap up all this conflict. Ogerpon from this day forth is welcome to the village anytime and is free to keep their masks. How magnanimous of them. We bring Ogerpon back to Dreaded Den to say goodbye, but it seems that it's, no surprise, gotten very fond of me and might want to stay with me instead. For Kieran, this is the last straw. He demands he and I battle to decide who Ogerpon can go with. Carmine brings up the only point that matters, which is that no matter how much he loves Ogerpon, it's up to them to decide. But Kieran doesn't care. His Pokemon are indeed at a higher level than last time, which is pretty good considering I'm not sure when he had time to train between then and last time, but he's still dragging behind and once again doesn't really stand a chance. After that is a fight with Ogerpon so I can catch it. I have to defeat it 3 times, each time it wears a different mask. I feel like it would have made more sense for Ogerpon to stay in Kitakami. We could have spruced up their cave a bit to make it more homey. They now have full village privileges, so Ogerpon can now do what they and their original friend had always wanted to do. Be themselves in the light of day and make new friends. But, you know, gotta catch them all, right? Kieran is able to stutter out a congrats, but he's still teal with envy, so he runs off. The next morning, Carmine tells us how Kieran hasn't left his room since yesterday, but in the meantime would like to battle Ogerpon. I had already removed them from my team since there'd be a level gap, so I had to make that little tweak before I could battle her. Ogerpon is cute and has a fun gimmick with the masks, but I only end up using them here and one other place I'll bring up later. All students have now finished their self-guided tours and need to come back to the community center. To be quite frank, I had forgotten that this was the only thing I originally had to do here, and it's a wonder it's taken everyone else this long to do it. Did Carmine even do it? We never hear who her partner was. But I guess I hold myself to higher standards because the caretaker calls us all prodigies for getting it done so quickly. Carmine, Kieran, who isn't there, and Briar need to go back to Blueberry Academy, but Carmine, in an ultimate show of growth, decides to address the students about how, despite her hostile nature towards them initially due to them being outsiders, acknowledges that everyone has been kind to her, and she should no longer judge people before she gets to know them, and everyone, but Kieran, is happy. In the final scene, we cut to Kieran telling himself over and over again in his room that he needs to become stronger and he's coming for me. To be continued. I mean, Teal Mask was fine. I like that I got someplace new to go and new characters, even though they don't make great decisions, and Ogerpon is cute, but the story is meh. The misunderstanding, if you can call it that, with Kieran you can see coming from a mile away, and the loyal three coming back to life is also weird. Kieran started as a shy, albeit weird kid, but has now entered his villain era for Indigo Disk. Carmine, on the other hand, is basically there to represent the village. She was holding on to the xenophobia that stunted her village for the past however many centuries, but after becoming more familiar with said fears, i.e. outsiders like me, she was able to shed it and become a better person. Equating to, Kieran said Ogerpon is good actually, and they went, oh okay, and everything is better now. But before moving away from Teal Mask, here's a couple more things that happened but didn't really impact the story. On my way to the first of the 3 sign locations, I ran into a new character, Perrin, and her Sui and Growlithe. Her purpose is to reward you for completing the Kitakami Pokedex, and I think she's pretty cool. Someone once said I look like her, and I can only hope that's accurate. I also ran into this older pair named Onair, president of Paldea Realty, and Billy. To say that they are rich is an understatement. They seem to have more time and money than God, and upon seeing me, a mere commoner, they get so flustered that they wonder how to ask for my autograph. But Onair settles for battling me. She takes defeat well and mentions that she now wishes to go visit a certain waterfall back in Paldea. You can find them in several different places where they will sometimes want to battle, but either way you come out richer than you were before. This also ties into a quest from the caretaker that I never even came across. Apparently he wants to rebuild the Loyal 3 monument. For some reason, hopefully in Ogerpon's image, and he's taking donations. It costs in total 1 million Pokebucks, and as a reward it seems you get a new outfit and emote for doing it. I considered going back to play these 2 quests, but ultimately decided perhaps another time. Let's move on. Once back in Paldea, Clavel summons me back to Yuva Academy, but it almost goes awry immediately because a random dude, who looks as if Doug Dimmadome was styled like a Rankin Bass character, tried to kidnap me. Clavel spawns in and tries to salvage this first encounter by letting me know that this guy is Director Cyrano of Blueberry Academy, and based on a recommendation from Carmine, would like me to spend some time there as an exchange student. Normally I would never, because this man gives off evil to me, but the game must go on, and so I must go. The school is basically an island with an entrance and lobby being the only immediate parts above water. But never mind that, for his true pride was in finding that perfect blueberry color for everything. It certainly isn't knowing how his own school works. He starts floundering at my basic inquiries and how things are run around here when he's rescued by Blueberry student Lacey stepping up to the plate. He is pleased at her arrival and shoves his responsibilities of me onto her, which seems to be a summation of the relationship these two have. But I'm happy about it. I feel much safer being with her than Dead-Eyed Dimmadome here. In the entrance lobby, it's explained that not only is this a battle-focused school, but that they have found a way to control terrestrialization despite being in Unova. When Lacey asks how exactly that works, Doug Dimmadome says he's forgotten, and that it was all Briar's project anyway. But what Doug Dimmadome does know is that he wants the 2 of us to battle, saying that I, champion of Paldea, versus Lacey of the Blueberry Elite 4 and daughter of a Unovan gym leader would make for a very fine match. I'm not sure if they ever actually say who her dad was, but it seems pretty safe to assume that it's Clay, one of the main reasons being that they both have an Excadrill as the race. I didn't terrestrialize, but I guess I was supposed to show Lacey because she seems bummed that I didn't. Whoops. At this point, Doug Dimmadome remembers to give me my blueberry uniform and the Indigo style card, which even furthers my aesthetic options. While the uniform does allow me to blend in better, I decide that a new final overhaul to my appearance was what I really needed. New school, new look, new rising. I head down to the main attraction of the school, which is the terrarium. It's a giant biosphere divided into 4 biomes, each with vastly different climates which house the different types of Pokemon you expect to see in these places in real life. Or, real life in Pokemon, that is, including other regional variants. At Lacey's recommendation, I attend a class in the coastal biome where the topic is just that. The assignment is to catch an Alolan variant and bring it back. There are several types in the area, but I caught Best Boy Alolan Executor. I never realized it was a dragon type until now, which means I've officially learned more at a Blueberry class than I ever did at a Yuva class. Before getting back to her own life, Lacey tells me about extracurricular activities they have here called Blueberry Quests, known as BBQs. These are small missions/assignments that net you Blueberry points upon completion. Most of these can be done on your own, but some need another player. You can use these points as currency at the school and to support student clubs. I can't remember giving Carmine my number, but I guess I must have before I left Kitakami because she calls me and asks to meet her somewhere. But I blow her off for a while and learn Pokemon synchronization instead. While in the terrarium, you can sync up with one of your Pokemon, which allows you to control them in the field. You can move around and do some simple battling. This I did know ahead of time because there was a time where there were a lot of clips of people discovering how odd certain Pokemon moved around when in the sync mode. After that, I finally gave Carmine the time of day, to which she says I haven't changed at all since we last saw each other, which leads me to believe that she must be blind. This hasn't held her back from accompanying Ms. Breyer on a number of research trips to different regions. I guess Carmine's gotten a bit more science-minded since we've last seen her. She, of course, asks us to battle, and after, she asks if we've seen Kieran yet, and speak of the devil, there he is! He's also changed since we last saw him, though while my makeover makes me look hot, his makes him look like an onion. But it's not just his appearance. We watch as he lays into another student for not being good enough to be part of his club. Carmine says that this has been going on ever since they've gotten back from Kitakami. Knowing his exposition is now needed, a new character enters from stage right. This guy is Drayton, who annoys the shit out of Carmine because she thinks he's a bozo. But what makes him notable is that before Kieran had begun his villain arc, Drayton was the strongest trainer at the school. Taking interest in us as the new student, Drayton brings us to the League Club to recruit us. At the academy, they have their own Pokemon battle ranking system, the BB League. Members of the league battle one another to climb up the ranks. The top rankers form the Elite Four, 2 of which are Lacey and Drayton, and of course the champion at the very top, where Kieran currently is and Drayton used to be. The clubroom has a support board, which is where you can give students from other clubs BP, and in return they'll do things like redecorate the clubroom, give your camera new functions, etc. Being a league member, or a trial member as Drayton puts it, gives me access to their outfits, and this was the missing piece of my character's Indigo Disk transformation. Carmine brings me up to my dorm room, which is about as useless as every other bedroom I've had in this game. She talks more about how Kieran has changed. All he does is battle and train. But hey, you can't argue with results. He's become a lot stronger, giving him the new status of champion and Elite Club president over Drayton. But now that Drayton is in the conversation, she can get into how she really can't stand him, especially now that he's requested to discuss my club member status over a cafeteria date. But I wasn't the only one invited. Drayton also invited the whole Elite Four plus Kieran to discuss the issue. Kieran is shocked to see me, and Drayton is initially met with resistance at the idea of a non-Blueberry student being in the club, so he puts it up to a vote. The girls vote no because it's unprecedented and would go against the rule requirement of being enrolled as a student. Drayton is obviously a yes, and Crispin loves the idea, believing that attending their classes and sleeping in their dorms is good enough to qualify me as being enrolled. Kieran is the tiebreaker, and true to his new vibe, goes the whole, I care not, for I'll defeat whomever I battle, putting the vote to a 3-2 in favor of me participating. The title of champion seems to carry a lot of weight because when Drayton tried to get me signed up, the lady was like, eh. But when Kieran was like, yes, I'll allow this, she was like, oh, pardon me, sir, right away, sir. Because I've got friends in high places, I can challenge the Elite Four right away instead of beating other students first. I can face them in any order I want to, and like the gyms from a million years ago, I need to complete a trial before I'll be allowed to battle. Each Elite Four member has their base in a different part of the terrarium, but to challenge them I need BP, so I guess it's time to do some BBQs. My current theory about why Drayton is pushing me so hard to do this is that he believes we might be the only one who can defeat Kieran and finally put him in his place. Once I have enough BP, I decide to start with Crispin. Type Fire, Shtick, Chef. His trial involves acquiring, by battle or trade, the right ingredients from nearby students in order to make a deliciously spicy sandwich. The first time I do this, I constructed based on what I assumed was the most spicy ingredients, and either my assumptions were incorrect or Crispin also cares about other flavors. Regardless, my first attempt was a flop, and from there I looked up a guide. I was finally forced into the mechanic I had been ignoring so easily up until now. Once satisfied with my sandwich, we commence our double battle as is standard for this league. I lead with Donald for super effective damage and Skeledirge to resist. This works well until Crispin terras his final Pokemon, Blaziken, and takes out Skeledirge. Donald also goes down, but not before doing most of the remaining work. Crispin loses in good spirits, though does comment on how the club is not what it used to be and he wishes it would go back to the way it was. Drayton then materializes in to congratulate us with a champ in the making reference, which is neat. Next was Amaris and her Steel-type Pokemon. Her test was to fly from point A to point B. Flying through the rains gave you more time. Basic stuff here. My eyes started twitching from being reminded of the Glacedo gym test, but it was worse than that, and it was my own fault. I don't know if the camera flipped from my usual preference of inverted, or if I was somehow without all my faculties, because I ended up flying completely off course and almost failed, even though normally it's almost impossible to finish the test without having more time than you started with. I still feel great embarrassment and shame. I was hoping Skeledirge could take out most of her team, but her Empoleon shut that down pretty quick. I might be putting a little too much onto that poor thing, but even that aside, the battle still came out in my favor. Committing to the bit, Drayton phased onto my plane of existence, this time with 2 Yos instead of 1. Seems he adds 1 after each victory over the Elite Four. And if that wasn't enough, Kieran stops by to see me, but it's just to tell me not to lose. Good advice there, champ. Third is Lacey, and her specialty is fairy types. Her task for me was to pass the Pokemon knowledge quiz, but it seems Lacey is too nice for her own good because even if you get a question wrong, you get to try again until you get it right, so I guess I don't really see the point in it. Fairy-type bosses have been an issue in the past, but I think either my leveling is truly getting out of hand, or the double battle format provided enough options, because I didn't really struggle this time. And of course, last is Drayton's Dragons in the polar biome, and like a true friend with ulterior motives, he covers my BP entry cost. I was excited to be on my last trial of the whole game, but I was also wary of what dumbassery they came up with for this. But in a twist that still shocks me, this one actually made sense. His trial was to defeat 3 other club members, but the catch is you can only use Pokemon you personally caught from the terrarium. Drayton basically calls out any intention of cheesing this with the strong Pokemon I've had all along. So I had to go into my box and mush together a whole new team of Pokemon that I've never used in this playthrough at levels much lower than my default team. Even so, I didn't really have much trouble, and my Horsey that I mainly brought for type coverage got to evolve, so that was pretty neat. But thankfully there were no such restrictions for the fight against Drayton himself. He had quite the powerhouse of a team, and it was far from a sweep, but I think at this point we're just going to have to accept that I'm an unstoppable force of nature. Not that Kieran would accept that, of course. In predictable fashion, he beams in to taunt me for being slow in progressing this far, and to also call out Drayton for how much time he's invested in my success, which, true to Drayton, he brushes it off and just says that he's trying to be a good citizen to his fellow human. Their personalities are quite the drastic contrast. As Drayton's final assistance to me, he takes me to go get signed up for my official match with Kieran. While we wait for it to begin, we have a talk about said onion boy, and he starts off by saying that he liked Kieran better when his hair was down. And I don't know, something about that phrasing really strikes a chord with me. Probably because I've thought similar things during the course of Indigo Disk. He goes on to say that while he'd basically pee himself in terror if you sneezed too loud, he still had an absolute joy when it came to battling. But out of nowhere he did a 180 and someone needs to snap him out of it. Me. The announcement goes off that the match is about to begin, but before I can proceed, I make one small change to my team. The match begins and my change is evident immediately. Despite being underleveled and never used except for that one time, I sent out Ogerpon as a final fuck you, Kieran, for all the trouble I've had to go through. Kieran does not take this well, but it serves him right. However, I do let Ogerpon go down just to see if there were any additional reactions from Kieran, but there were not. Speaking of reacting, he does not take to losing well. Despite all evidence to the contrary, he was just beside himself that he somehow didn't win. My favorite part was Drayton getting in the last word and calling him ex-champion. While Kieran goes through the 5 stages of grief, the rest of the Elite Four discuss what happens now. By defeating the champion, I'm entitled to the title now, but how does that apply to someone who does not attend full-time? In addition, my placement brings everyone down a peg, which would knock Crispin from Elite Four status. If I recall correctly, they just leave this thread hanging and proceed with the story. If it were up to me, I'd have myself labeled as an honorary champion, then have Drayton and Kieran have a rematch to see who should be champion, with the loser taking the spot as strongest of the Elite Four. Even if Kieran won again, I feel like he wouldn't be able to shake the knowledge that he isn't as powerful as he thought he was. But since they didn't ask me, I leave them to ponder the issue and answer my summons from Miss Briar, one that was also extended to Carmine, Drain, and Kieran. Briar and Gita would like us, accompanied by Briar, to go on an expedition into Area Zero. With the new knowledge that dangerous Pokemon are down there and can escape to ground level Paldea, they want to have the legendary Pokemon that supposedly lives down there to be investigated. Drain declines because of league duties, i.e. he just doesn't feel like it, but everyone else is on board. Kieran sees this as another opportunity to get himself a legendary Pokemon, i.e. he's still not over it. Gita pulls me aside to address the Caparaja in the room that, yes, while I did technically break the rules when I went down there last time, it ended up being a choice that did a lot of good, and now this time I'd be going down with the full permission and support from the League. She also addressed the other Caparaja in the room in that, yes, she did tell Miss Briar most of what happened down there, to better prepare her for what she'll see and not ask a lot of big questions. Before parting, Gita gives us the Indigo Disk. They said it. Which for now is just a disc having to do with Area Zero. With my business at Blueberry Academy concluded, we let Miss Briar know we're ready to go, but we're already off to a bad start as Kieran obsesses over catching such a powerful Pokemon, and Briar, too distracted in her excitement to be a suitable protector of children, approves the perceived enthusiasm. And sure enough, upon actually descending into Area Zero, Briar cannot contain herself, nor can Miraidon it seems, for this time they have no problem being out of their Pokeball. Briar mentions that where we need to go is even deeper down than the lab I found AI Turo in, so step 1 is to get back to that location to use its elevator. On the way I found Mariah 2 just chilling as an encounter. Either it had never gone back to its Master Ball after its defeat, or that answers the question of what happens to contained Pokemon should their master perish / leave this era of time. But it's there, so I might as well catch it. After using a zillion Pokeballs, I was about ready to reset and use a Master Ball of my own when a critical capture from a Timer Ball finally did it. We get to the lab but are initially locked out with no conventional passcode or key, which of course means the mystery item Kita gave me just so happens to be the solution. While I'm messing with this, you can see Kieran being at odds with himself. He's still trying to act all cool and edgy, but he can't help but let slip the wonder he feels at being at a place like this. My team is in shambles for Mariah too, but there's no rest spot or checkpoint to get back here easily, so once inside, I just take the elevator down and hope for the best. Thanks to the Indigo Disk redirecting the elevator, rather than popping out where the time machine was, it goes even further down to the underdepths. There's a research table with notes from the late Professor Turo, and Briar, like with everything she's seen in Area Zero so far, is very excited about it. Some of the notes describe how the treasure of Area Zero, is Terapagos, who has taken on a crystal form to protect itself, and others go on to mention that there is a unique form of terrestrialization down here that holds the power of every known type, one that Turo had named the Stellar type. Progression into the caves is slowed by crystal walls that block entryways. The only way to remove these is to defeat the nearby Stellar Terra-type Pokemon. These Pokemon cannot be caught. How their defeat removes crystal walls, or at least put them up in the first place, is anyone's guess. The pacing for this whole section suddenly comes to a frustrating stutter due to how the game stops to have a mini cutscene at the discovery of every wall, at the defeat of the Stellar Pokemon, and coming back to the newly accessible entryways. At the end, Carmine warns me that due to her fighting off the wild Pokemon while I've been opening paths, she only has one Pokemon left and won't be able to do much else should something happen. I'm sure it'll be fine. Terapagos is indeed at the end, appearing to only be a crystal. In a loud proclamation that this will solve all of his problems, Kieran, with Briar's continued encouragement for these behaviors, pulls it out of the surrounding crystal with the strength of sheer desperation. The crystal transforms into a small, cute turtle, and, as it happens, it starts to come towards me. But that sets Kieran off and he throws a Master Ball to capture it. Briar approves of this mayhem and then asks for him to bring out Terapagos to study his power, meaning Kieran and I have to battle. When the battle starts, it transforms and gains the ability to distort type matchups, but even that doesn't give it much of an advantage and I win pretty quickly. Kieran is quite distraught that this so-called great treasure is currently not living up to its title, but Briar points out that Terapagos' power should be much greater than this and doesn't match the description in the Violet book. She realized that terrestrializing will unlock its true power, but when he does this, its power goes completely out of control. Miraidon actually had to step in front of a blast that would have hurt Kieran. Carmine tells Kieran to call him back to its ball, but its power is too strong and the ball actually breaks. Stopping it is paramount, so Carmine and I battle it. It has a barrier protecting a section of its HP. Terra attacks are the only, because the game did this on purpose, way to do any sort of worthwhile damage to it. So I'm at first at the mercy of the 3 turns it takes to charge the Terra Orb. Carmine's Sinistra goes down pretty early on, so unless someone else wants to give me a hand, I'm on my own. Once its barrier was broken, it stole my Terra power, see that's why it was required, and puts up another barrier and changed types. Unlike regular battles where I could only Terra once, it seems that my orb will keep recharging. After the cycle happens again, they're finally able to get through to Kieran, who's just been blaming himself this whole time, to help me. After breaking its third barrier, it's unable to absorb more Terra energy and I'm able to win. Though Kieran getting the final hit is not a way for him to get back into my good graces. With Kieran's blessing, I catch Terapagos, and when it's all over, Briar finally comes down from her research high and apologizes that her obsession had put us all in danger. Kieran apologizes as well, saying that all he wanted to do was to be just like me, but with the firm knowledge that that's never going to happen, he's finally able to let it go and end his villain arc. We get back to Blueberry Academy and Kieran pulls me aside to ask me for the chance to start over and have a fresh start, to which I have no choice but to agree to. But if nothing else, it concludes the Indigo Disk as well as the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero story. All in all, I liked this more than Teal Mask. Once again, there was a new area to explore, but I found learning about another Pokemon Academy, beating their Elite Four, and going back to Area Zero was more exciting than Masks and getting Kieran upset for literally no reason. Like Ogerpon, Terapagos has come too late for me to use in the game, but unlike Ogerpon where I was required / had meme reasons to use it, Terapagos does not, so I never ended up using it. Kieran of course is evil for most of it, and there's nothing quite like a timid kid trying to act like a badass. Normally it would be epilogue time, but it turned out I had some business to take care of first. The game drops me off in my blueberry room, and right away I get yet another summons from Briar, and my intention was to answer it promptly, but then I got distracted. Like Ayuba, there are characters I can chat with for extra dialogue and some extra perks, so I do that instead. Doug Dimmadome has noticed the excitement I've generated around here and requested I use my BP to recruit other trainers from Paldea to battle and coach the league. How BP translates to actual compensation outside the school is a mystery to me. But yeah, you can have up to 2 coaches at a time. At that moment I could only afford 1, and my starting choices were the Paldean gym leaders, so of course I brought in Larry. The battle itself was pretty whatever, but if you find him afterwards, he actually has a lot to say. One of them being that he was informed that I had told Rika during the champion assessment that he was my favorite gym leader, and this confuses him. Crispin is also in the club room, so I check in on him, and in addition to maybe having a crush on Lacey, he's pretty bummed about being bumped from the Elite Four, but finds it worth it because the league is back to normal again. I guess they made the decision to remove him regardless of whatever my student status is. That's pretty harsh. Amaris also wanted to talk to me. She expressed her gratitude that I was able to get Kieran back to normal, and laments that she herself couldn't do more. Possibly another crush within the BB League? As a thank you, she gives Miranda more of the supplements she gave him during her gym trial with the intent of temporary flight. But he eats so much that he can now fly permanently wherever we are. Before I do anything else, I use my new flight to get on top of the big Terra crystal that hangs at the top of the terrarium for some items. Finally with Briar, she shows me that she's somehow already written a book on what happened in Area Zero, with some omissions of course, and gives us a proof of copy as an apology for her contributions to what happened. Then she studies my Terra Orb and confirms that it, like Kieran and Carmine's, no longer needs to charge due to what happened in Area Zero. She also tinkered with the terrarium's big crystal, and now stellar Terra-type Pokemon have been spotted in the terrarium. She ends with, "A man in a blue suit wants to talk to me," which is Doug Dimmadome. At this point, I don't know why she feels the need to be so coy and cryptic about it. All he wants is for me to come see him after I filled the Blueberry Pokedex, so that's that. I had thought, until I remembered I still had stakes to pull from the ground back in Paldea. Yeah, remember in the previous video I found a stake in the ground in a place where I didn't think I was meant to be, and I was like, yeah, I'll get to that later? Well, later is now. There are 4 sets of stakes in random places all over Paldea. Each set is a different color, and there are 8 in each set. I do not recommend doing this without a guide. You might find a few naturally as you play, but unless you enjoy just combing every inch of land, though easier with permaflight, there are better uses of your time. Once you collect a complete set, it unlocks a nearby shrine which houses one of the treasures of Ruin, legendary Pokemon. Chi-Yu was my last one, and due to game fatigue and seeing no reason to keep hoarding them, I just used one of my Master Balls on it. Due to not checking in with UVA students and staff for quite some time, there's a lot of people I can talk to. Before in the main game video, I skipped these mostly due to them being irrelevant, like Miss Dendra's cooking skills, but these all do have some connection to things that have happened, so we'll humor them this time around. Miss Rayford was the one who wanted me to investigate these ruined Pokemon, and for handling all 4, she gives me the nasty plot TM. Thanks? Arvin wants to learn more about himself, and for him, that's learning where he came from, and decides to find out more about his dad, since he's an alumni of UVA, and sets out all excited, once again downplaying how shitty of a father he was. He ends up talking to Clavel, who gives Arvin a part of one of Turo's research papers. It also explains that the reason that his office is so full of shit, lab equipment, is that it actually used to be Turo's research lab. Since Clavel also enjoyed it, he modified it to also serve as his office after Turo left. Turo was considered gifted even during his time at school. While we've been gallivanting with our new friends, Arvin has finally taken the time to read the part of the Violet book that didn't pertain to the Urban Mystica. He showed us a passage meant to hint at Terapagos, so I wonder how long this has been available to see. I gain access to his dorm room, where he confides that his journey to Mambastev's recovery has inspired him to become a cook, so that he can make all sorts of food for Pokemon packed with nutrients and health benefits. Meanwhile, Penny is worried that the Team Star bosses will have a hard time integrating back into school life, so we spy on them. To get people to stop being scared of them, Giacomo and, reluctantly, Ortega give a big hello in front of everyone in the entrance hall, which actually ends up working. Atticus is at the school store trying to buy 2 ninja outfits, but they're sold out. Just then, the little buddy he had wanted to give one of the outfits to makes a guest appearance to show Atticus that he had just bought those very 2 outfits, so now they can go play ninja together. Even now, I'm still not used to Atticus with his mask off. Then we go to the art room because Penny heard a rumor that Team Star would be raiding it. Mela and Aerie do show up, but it's because Mela wants to join the art club, inspired by her Team Star outfit her friend had made for her. Also, she gains confidence after looking at the surrounding art, learning that being an artist is not a prerequisite to join. Satisfied that her friends are doing well, Penny shows us her dorm room, which is covered in tech, boxes, and her various EVs. But then Giacomo and Aerie wished to chat with me, and it got weird from here because the members of Team Star are now in regular uniforms instead of crazy outfits and makeup. Giacomo and Ortega's transformations are the least dramatic, but you wouldn't have ever known it was Aerie or Mela unless someone told you, especially Aerie. She and Giacomo ask if I can help tutor the other Team Star bosses since they are not doing well in their studies. I agree and show up, but Mela is missing, and Ortega is very against the idea, especially since he's a whole year above me. Mela is spending some quiet time in the veggie garden, and I convince her to come back with me. I tutor each one individually. Ortega is having trouble in literature, and we help him decipher the meaning of a story passage, about how sometimes what people say aren't how they actually feel, which is relevant to him being reluctant to accept my help. Atticus struggles in math and doesn't see the purpose of him learning it when fashion is his dream. But I point out that yes, actually, numbers are very important for a designer, and just like that, he's never been more motivated to learn. Mela's problem is more that she doesn't have a dream to focus on like the others and feels adrift. I bring up her interest in art that she doesn't know that I know about, but we're going to ignore that, and once I confirm for her that can indeed be a dream, she feels much better. Penny clambers into the room and is initially hurt, thinking that we were intentionally excluding her, but when informed that they only did want to burden her, she says that's a lot of crap, and to from now on keep her in the loop so that she can help them too. Team Star gives me some clothes as a thank you. Nimona is basically the same as always, but I see that, unsurprisingly, her reputation has made finding matches with other students a struggle. They don't want to fight a match they know they're going to lose. Nimona is frustrated at how so many people are unable to see the fun in all battles, even once they lose. It also grinds her gears when people treat her skill as something she just has rather than worked for and earned. At her dorm room, she reasserts herself as my rival and only continues to nurture her unhealthy attachment towards me in battle. Jacques still only cares about my Pokedex progress, and I still don't have the sweet Herba Mystica that Saguaro is looking for. Just the salty one. Phew. That was a lot of housekeeping. But all that's left now is the epilogue, and I want that to be a clean finish with nothing else I want to do. So, for the sake of my voice, because I've done this all in one sitting so far, let's just finish it. I initiated the epilogue, which, if you're doing it after the fact like I was, is not very intuitive. You need to go into Mystery Gift and receive the mythical Pecha Berry, and then, with no prompt from the game that I noticed, you need to go back to Kitakami, and next to the Pokemon Center is a store called Peachy's, where you need to interact with this dusty decoration, which will then disappear, officially starting the Mochi Mayhem epilogue. Arvin then calls you to inform you that friends go over each other's houses, therefore he wanted to come to mine. So right back to Paldea I go, where I find not only him, but also Penny and Nimona, who decided to invite themselves. I haven't seen my mom since I left at the beginning of the game, so it's probably a good time to say hi. Speaking of Mom, she gives me a letter that came in from Kieran. He says that he's taking a leave of absence from school, and as such so is Carmine, and expresses how he felt that we didn't properly catch up after what happened in Area Zero, so he'd like for me and any friends to come visit. Arvin gets real jealous for some reason. They play it off in terms of him being protective of his status as best friend, even though I don't recall ever reciprocating that feeling whatsoever. We all go to Kitakami together, and Kieran is very happy to see us. We do intros, he gets stomped on in a battle with Nimona, and then Carmine finally materializes, but she's acting weird by way of moving in place, tucking her hands under her arms and flapping them like wings, and only saying the word Mochi. Kieran sheepishly asks us to take her back to their grandparents' house, where he explains that this has been going on for a few days, and their grandparents have been keeping an eye on her. Just not at that moment, I guess. Rumors have been going around about a curse plaguing Kitakami, which Kieran had initially dismissed, but is now second-guessing. They all promise to help him figure this out tomorrow. Kieran meets us at the community center the next day as Nimona is returning with sodas from Peachy's. She starts having a side conversation with Penny about how she ate some free snacks, but the conversation we're supposed to be more invested in is that Arvid is annoyed that the TV at the community center only plays the same tourism video over and over again, so now we've got to go find the remote that the caretaker has hidden. I'm not sure how this is meant to get us closer to helping Carmine, but I quickly find it in a potted plant. While that was going on, Nimona vanished, so the next quest is to find her. Penny and Arvin wait there in case she comes back while I head out with Kieran. I guess finding the remote took longer than I thought because outside it's now nighttime and we run into 2 workers from the orchard. Upon approaching to ask if they've seen Nimona, it becomes apparent that they're suffering from the same affliction as Carmine and convey that they want to battle. Beating them calms them down, but they're still under whatever influence caused this. We then see that Nimona is running towards Kitakami Hall, and once there we find Kieran's grandparents. Grandpa tries to help us, but Grandma, who is clearly not in her right mind, insists that Grandpa eats some of the mochi she's been carrying around. He finds it all very strange, but opts to do it so she'll stop bothering him, and in a twist that shocked no one, it turns out she was cursed, and now so is Grandpa after eating the mochi. We battle, and just like with the orchard workers, they become a lot more passive upon defeat. I then get a call from Arvin and Penny, who sound like they're in peril, so we rush back over, but it was only because something had startled Penny, which turned out to be that dusty decoration from before. But it seems to actually be a Pokemon. It then shoots Mochi at everyone. Kieran and I dodge the ones aimed at us, but not knowing better, Arvin and Penny eat theirs and of course become cursed themselves. We do battle, but now that the enemy has shown themselves, we're finally able to go after it. Conveniently, the Pokemon is also going to Kitakami Hall, and conveniently, Nimona is still there. Despite being predictably cursed, her love for battling triumphs the previously established belief that those cursed could only say Mochi. The weird Pokemon uses her for a shield, so we have to defeat her first to get to it. Meanwhile, everyone who has been cursed has followed Kieran and I here like a pack of zombies. Kieran keeps them busy while I take care of Nimona. Her Pokemon's levels are in the high 80s, but mine are in the mid to high 90s, so I wasn't too worried. But knowing that this was the last trainer fight of the game, I tarot my forever loyal starter Donald and let her finish off what was once that Fuecoco I left behind so long ago. Donald was gracious enough to pass the honor onto my own, now level 99 Skeledirge. The fight was actually enough to get him to level 100, so congrats to Goofy for being maybe the first level 100 Pokemon I have ever trained. With Nimona defeated, the weird Pokemon is finally ready to fight me, but the game didn't auto-heal me, which I'm not sure if I've mentioned, but is something that happens quite frequently after things like this, so I leave Kieran to hold the fort while I take care of that. Ready to face this thing on my time, and planning on using another Master Ball for this final encounter, I confront it, and beat it in 2 turns without taking damage, because I just happen to have a Spartha out in front who does super effective damage. It was done in the raid battle format, though it did not Terra, so I'm freely able to catch it in any ball. I choose a luxury ball to commemorate it as my last capture of the playthrough. Everyone at last goes back to normal and it's time to say goodbye. Kieran, and therefore Carmine, announced that they're ready to go back to school and a good time was had by all. Minus the obvious. The game drops me back at Yuva, and as my last act of the playthrough, I boost my team their last couple of levels to 100 as a reward for all they've done. Oddly enough, I had the exact amount of candies I needed. Being that it's an epilogue, I wasn't expecting much from it, and that's basically what I got. Though my favorite part, other than Penny trying to advocate for playing video games on the community center TV, was that Kieran was allowed to be his normal self again. His hair still isn't down, but at least he's a more agreeable onion now. And with that, that's that. I already got sappy in the last video, so I don't really feel the need to get deep here. For months now, I've been going over things Pokémon Violet, and it's a big relief to say that once I click the word publish, I'll finally be able to move on to other things. Working on videos for games doesn't really change my feelings on them, but it does tend to burn me out on them, especially long ones like this. But it does help in letting me hit the ground running for the next one. And what is the next one, you ask? Well, here's a clue. It's a Mario game, which I think is actually a first on this channel. Subscribe if you want to stay in the loop. Maybe subscribe to RisingFeathers Plays if you want to see how this, or any of my playthroughs went. I appreciate all your patience as always between videos, and I'll see everyone on the next one. I'm finally done. Finally fucking done with this game. I just realized I'm still recording. Maybe I'll add this at the end. It's a love-hate, you know? Like, it's been over a year in the making. Like, it shouldn't have been, but it was. And, yeah, anyway, goodbye.